Hello, this is Nancy Ayana Wyatt. This post is part of a Zoom speech which I gave on the topic of racism and activism. I gave it to a chapter of the Holistic Chamber of Commerce, which is an international organization, but I gave it just to a local chapter. So I have to talk as fast as an auctioneer because they only gave me 20 minutes for a subject that takes 20 years. The consequence is that the concepts are incomplete and oversimplified, but I'm offering resources and links to books at the end of the speech, and you will not be able to see that, but I will leave you my web page in order to get there. In fact, let me do it right now before I forget. The web page is mypersuasivepresentations.com. I have a Facebook account to that effect and also a whole website devoted to this and many other topics. So my opening salvo is that you need to do your very best to hold your reactions and keep an open mind until you've heard a complete thought. Because as usual, I will probably I will fail to signal before turning, and I will wind up somewhere different from what you expected. I am willing to hold classes and sessions on this in a more leisurely fashion so that we can actually interact and talk about it. But this is just a straight speech. So let's start with racism. What qualifies me to talk about racism? Like, do I have any street creds, and do Black folks think I have any credibility and right to speak about this? I could take the entire 20 minutes just listing my background as relates to Black communities. But instead, I'm just going to make a few main points. I'm not sharing them for egotistical reasons, but rather to give you an idea about the breadth of racism, as well as to help you think about things that you might want to do to help as you see some of the things that I've done in my past. It all began when I was a child. I was raised by an overtly racist father in Colorado. I never even saw a Black person until I was 13 years old, and there was just like one kid on a sidewalk somewhere. I have no idea where he came from or where he went. But the Mexican Americans and Native Americans were treated equally as poorly as Black folks. So I learned about racism early in childhood. I was in the Black movement from 1968, before lots of you were even born. And it all began when I started working for a program called COSEP, which was instituted in order to support minority students at an all-white Ivy League university known as Cornell. Because of my association with that program, we were experiencing frequent bomb threats. We had to evacuate multiple times a day. Shots rang out across campus as we were walking across the quad, as it was called. The Africana Studies Center was burned to, not to the ground, but like unusable. And that was by arsonists. Of course, they never found them. To this day, they've never found them. Isn't that amazing? And we would receive things like chicken feathers and tar in envelopes with obscene messages in them. So that was pretty traumatic. But the fact is that this kind of thing happens frequently across America, year in and year out, to people of color, to minority families when they move into new neighborhoods. And it happens to their churches, as we all know. There is the famous no-knock entry. It's called When They Come in the Morning. Yes, I experienced that too. It's usually around 3 a.m. They do a loud banging on the walls and the windows and the doors, yelling loudly, fast motion invasion with guns drawn to take away a Black man from the apartment. This man was a teacher and a doctoral candidate at an Ivy League university. He is a Rhodes Scholar, and he was a full-grown man who as easily could have been talked to in an office or one of the classrooms or anywhere in a normal setting. He had committed no crime. It was not about drugs, not about alcohol, not about sex trafficking, not about gun running, none of that. They wanted to ask questions about his immigration status. This same man is now a world-renowned scientist, medical doctor, and physician in the area of pharmaceutical research. And yet he could be stopped any day, at any time, by a cop and killed, just like George Floyd was. I have a Black family too. I helped raise 2 Black children. I experienced extreme housing and other discrimination, both subtle and overt, but we really don't have time to go into all those details. Papa Bear died a few years ago, but the family does still claim me. I'm going to give you a few examples of volunteerism. I was a founding member of the National Political Congress of Black Women in Prince William County. I was an attendee of the first African American, I'm saying it wrong, Methodist Episcopal Church in Manassas for some years. I was a member of the Prince William County Task Force on HIV and AIDS in the African American community. I'm sorry, I'm distracted by a cat who is trying to get me to get up and leave this presentation. So that's what you're hearing in the background. I shall carry on. I was the secretary of the Southern Africa Liberation Committee, which was designed and instituted to help release Nelson Mandela from prison. I was part of a group that created computer training programs, and we were invited in to Sing Sing prison by the inmates chapter of the NAACP. Think about that. These were lifers. They were not there for jaywalking. They had their own chapter of the NAACP, and we were teaching them computer skills. I was a volunteer for several years with thousands of homeless people in Washington, D.C. They were mostly Black because most of the population, except for the big house, is Black in D.C. While there, I scripted the stories of many of those people. I put them into a playbook, which you can still buy and get licensing for performances, but I also published it as a real book. It's short, it's enlightening. I suggest you get it. But the reason I mention it here is because I still perform some of those monologues from that book to teach people about how folks get into addiction and AIDS and that kind of thing, and homelessness. So contact me if you need that resource. This offer is being made to the people to whom I'm giving this speech. If you're somewhere else and I have to travel, you might get charged. Okay. Based on the foregoing experience, my impression about police was very similar to all the anger and angst, outrage, enrage, and sadness that everyone's feeling now. My summary image was the beating of Rodney King. And then I took a job in which I was in charge of fully sworn, fully operative police department for about 20 years. So I consider that God's bad joke on them and me. We taught each other and we came to respect each other, and I still have issues for the reasons that are obvious to everybody. I did a couple of videos, one of which was about whether police should have military equipment. And I did another thing about defunding the police. You can see that if you're interested. But let's take a moment, just take a deep breath. Clear your thoughts. Deep breath, and let's go from here. When I prepared to do this presentation that for such a short time slot, I was faced with two options. Because what I really wanted to do was to give you a long list of examples of white privilege and examples of subtle racism that permeates our society. But, you know, you have to listen to your highest self sometimes. And when I did that, listen, I decided to take us to try a higher level and just mention a few situations and then concentrate more on resources and how we can help. So if you're interested in additional classes and seminars and things where we can take a leisurely time and discuss it, that's great. But for now, we're just going to launch into something and get to resources at the end. Who is an expert on topics about racism? I'm going to talk about racism, but you need to know one thing. There is no such thing as a white expert on Black people, period. There's also no such thing as a Black expert on all Black people in the following sense. Black people are not all alike. Please pardon my stereotyping as I try to explain this, but not all Black folks meet that stereotype of being undereducated, poverty-stricken, rap music loving, drug pushing, la la la. Someone who is Black, who is raised in McLean, Virginia, in that luxurious housing by parents who were among the computer scientists who developed artificial intelligence and who now own an IT company that contracts with the Department of Defense, does not have the same life experience or viewpoints as a single mother in Harlem working 3 jobs who still cannot afford to pay both the rent and food. Ha! You didn't know there were Black folks who were integral to the development of computer software and artificial intelligence, did you? Surprise, I know some. In fact, I know a whole cadre of Black people who helped develop and design software from the very beginning of computer programs. You'll never hear their names. You'll hear Bill Gates, but I know them, and I actually lived with one of them. Also, white folks are not homogeneous either. The perspective of a white person living in that same McLean luxurious housing by virtue of their systems design skills has a dissimilar outlook from those held by people whose occupation is driving a front loader, they live in a trailer, and they're in rural America. Even among people in the same socio-economic groups, there are differences. I know a Black Republican who became quite well known, who worked with George Bush II in an economic development agency dealing with faith-based organizations. Most of the rest of the leaders in the organization where I met that guy, which was the National Urban League headquarters in New York City under Vernon Jordan, most of them would have been Obama supporters then and now. So what elite Black folks have in common with urban and rural Black folks is that they are equally likely to be stopped, harassed, brutalized, and even killed by the police. Equally likely. What white folks have in common with themselves, no matter where they come from, is that they are not likely to have those experiences. So let me go one little caveat back to a role of an exception to the rule about experts. You might find one in Dr. Henry Louis Gates and others who've devoted their whole lives to the study of African American history. And they've done documentaries. This is the same guy whom you see on Ancestry. So I would recommend a lot of those kinds of programs. Okay, so now we're going to take the view high, low, and in between. We're going to look at this from 35,000 feet, as the expression goes, and then go all the way down to one little person, what one little person can do, and then we'll talk about some stuff in the middle. If you were God and you were looking down on earth over time, over all of time, you would see there are prejudices and cruelty among Black Americans, Africans, and West Indians. They may have similar shades of colors, but they have a lot of conflicts. Among Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and people from other South American countries, they may all speak Spanish, but their cultures are different, and even their use of language is different. And there are conflicts. Among Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and other Asiatic groups, the same thing applies. Obviously, among Middle Eastern countries, there are conflicts and wars ad infinitum. And white people against other white people based on culture and occupation and geography even. So people in other countries are protesting now, in my opinion, not just in support of George Floyd, but because their countries also have rampant prejudice and experience police or military brutality. It's everywhere. Man has been doing unto man since time immemorial. And recognizing the universality and longevity of bigotry is perhaps the most disheartening aspect of racism. These evil strains have pervaded mankind since the beginning of time. And when you see hatred and violence among all people, you might think that issues of prejudice and cruelty literally are insurmountable. Guess what? Maybe they are. And then what? I don't want to deal with these issues or actions like fads that just disappear as soon as the cameras go away. The suggestions that I make may or may not resonate with you, especially if you are among the people who are introverts or who are afraid to speak publicly and to take political action for several reasons. So first, before we do anything else, let's go to a baseline that anyone can do at any time, anywhere. And that is, from my perspective, a matter of individual integrity and adherence to the principles of fairness and equality. Simply stated, it's the golden rule, which is a maxim found in many religions and cultures. We know it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Do not treat others in a way you would not want to be treated. And the empathetic or responsive form of that is what you wish upon others, you're wishing upon yourself. Because it turns out that the golden rule also equates to karma, the law of action and consequences resulting from actions, whether they are positive or negative. It also goes with the street saying, what goes around comes around. So you can do small things and big things in every aspect of your everyday based on that, and you will be making a contribution if you make it be about kindness, truthfulness, integrity, and compassion. The truth is that many of you will feel uncomfortable with taking a more activist posture for a bunch of reasons. And some of you have zero interest in learning about the trials and tribulations of people of color and how they experience the world. So these kinds of folks will not follow up on any of my suggestions, I imagine. Whether or not that is true of you, the most important takeaway from the whole presentation is that golden rule as the guiding principle of your life. You don't have to believe in God. You don't have to believe in any kind of religion. You can just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. There's a quote I saw on Twitter from someone who calls him or herself the Tao of Now. It says, the universe unfolds, bringing to bear any cause that needs to be included. Don't take this process personally. The working out of cause and effect is eternal. You are part of this rising and falling that never ends. So maybe that will bring some comfort to you. But let's take it to the next level now and look at some examples of white privilege and unconscious stereotyping, which results in racist actions and inactions. One of the subtle ways in which racism is pervaded and is unwittingly absorbed by all of us in society is through the news coverage. I first learned this back at Cornell University during our racial strife. And around that time, this is the time of the Vietnam War, the women's movement, the gay movement, the black movement, the everybody's everything movement. But in Boston, there was a white guy who viciously attacked a black guy. We're talking weapons here. Viciously. The white guy started it, but the black guy won. So how does the news coverage, even though it admits the white guy started it, what they show is the poor little white boy in the hospital bed. And they show the black guy with his hands handcuffed behind his back being marched off to prison. When we used to watch the 6 o'clock news every night, you could see that same thing being reenacted over and over in incident after incident, where always it's the black guy in handcuffs and the white guy, or person, I should say, in some pitiable view. It's also, of course, we know the way in which history has been taught in schools, leaving out or misrepresenting the roles and of both white and black folks. Black folks in terms of contributions, white folks in terms of the brutality and genocides against Native Americans, Mexican Americans, and black people. I'm going to speak a moment about Antifa. This is the latest. Antifa is a straw man. It's a fake entity that was created by right-wing and Russian operatives who are promulgating active measures for political purposes. There's no such thing as Antifa in the sense that there is no organization, there's no leader, there's no set of officers, there's no platform. And yet you can see this being sent out over the airwaves on Twitter. You can just watch the bots working to stick this stuff out in the news. The word Antifa means anti-fascist. That can apply to millions of people. You don't need an organization for that. And I'm going to, of course, I'm having to read my little speech to you on Zoom, which is pretty weird. And that's why my eyes keep going up and down. So I'm going to skip through a bunch of it and just go to the last point about that. Even though most of the reporters on legitimate news media know this, they have to deal in sound bites. They can't explain this every time that they're talking about Antifa in response to one of the president's tweets. So they are mentioning it as if it were a legitimate organization of left-wing wingnuts. And that helps make it come into the society in the subconscious and conscious as if it were a legitimate thing to fight against. They're making me crazy. Okay, let's talk about shopping for a minute. As soon as a person of color enters a store, it is quite likely that they will be followed around for their whole entire time there by the security officers, or they will be watched on closed circuit television to see if they're shoplifting. Part of white privilege is that normally does not happen to you. You have to actually look suspicious, be known, or act suspicious before that happens to you. Another example about shopping, I was with my black family in a very small store with almost no customers. Papa Bear is 6 feet 6 inches tall. His son is 14 and 6 feet 8 inches tall. His daughter lucked out of 5'9". You can hear our conversation in the store. There's like nobody there. My son asks, do I want something? I say, no, I'm not going to get anything. So he goes up to the counter with his little goods to make the purchase. And the white clerk behind the counter turns to me, standing off to the side, and asks if she could help me. It's all kinds of little subtle, stupid stuff like that that just seeps into into our culture. I'll give you one more little example. Because he was so tall, this son was being We had to get a lawyer for him, and he was 14 years old because we had so many coaches trying to come recruit him for basketball. And even though his father also was very athletic, his father is literally a genius, Again, one of the people developing computer software from scratch before there was such a thing as computer software, so to speak. And we wanted to know about the academic programs. And some of those recruiters literally could not carry on a conversation with us after they came to and found out that we didn't just want to know about the basketball program, and that we weren't just poor Black folks with no money, no education, and we would just be so happy if our son got famous. It literally blew their minds. Last example, El son also was a genius. He got a B+ on a book report one time, and I felt so sorry for him because he came home so happy. He got a B+, and his teacher told him he was finally living up to his abilities. I went off because this boy could have written the book, not gotten a B+ on a book report. He was so far from having met his own abilities. Of course, later in life, he achieved them, so that was good. Let's talk some more about white privilege and the police. What do you think when you see a police officer approaching you? If you're a white person, you think, oh, geez, I might get a ticket now. If you're a Black person, you think, I might get killed now. Do you understand? In that connection, right before I did this speech, which is partly what made it longer than it's supposed to be, is I just found out that there's new software available. If you say, Siri, I'm getting pulled over, when you have this shortcut feature that's called police for iPhones, and you say that phrase, Siri can automatically stop all the programs you were working on, and it will automatically start recording the encounter with the police. It will send a text message to the person you have designated for that purpose. And it will also send a video of that encounter to your contact. I found this on Business Insider and on my website where this whole speech is. You can get to the link or you can just Google it. But that is like really important, and I hope that a lot of people would take advantage of it. In terms of activism, let's move to activism and the role of bravery. Taking action publicly may be very frightening, but it is also freeing, and it gives you a sense of purpose and some accomplishment, as opposed to just sitting there worrying about what can I do or there's nothing I can do. There's no courage required if you weren't afraid to begin with. And unfortunately for me, that's been mostly me. But bravery is required in times when you're afraid. And the best tool I know for overcoming fear is a belief in the principles and or the people whom you're supporting. When your belief is seriously powerful, it demands action. And it demands that you stand on that principle regardless of fear. That's what's happened to the people watching the officer murder George Floyd with cold-blooded intent. That's why people were able to take to the streets despite the COVID-19 thing and to speak up throughout the world's civilizations. That principle of equal justice for all is almost like innate and universal, and it can inspire you to actions you would not take on any other subject. Let's talk about the role of politics in systemic racism. Quote, we in America do not have government by the majority. We have government by the majority who participate, unquote. Speaker was Thomas Jefferson. I used to be one of those people who finds politics so abhorrent, I didn't want anything to do with any of it. Didn't matter if it were office politics or Republican Democrat politics. I wanted nothing to do with it. And then I realized two things. Politicians are lawmakers who affect every single aspect of every single life, even in any country. They affect health, they affect business, they affect education. There is no topic that is unscathed or untouched for the better by whatever those people decide. And I also learned that people who don't participate are a whole political group in themselves. They are the political group of non-participants. And interest groups work hard and spend money on ads to keep you that way so you will not vote. They do it through formal means like policies, regulations, and laws, and informal means like peer pressure or the kind of pressure a boss exerts on employees. So whether you like it or not, you're either a player or you're being played. Thus, it's important to pay attention to what's going on. For example, the current administration and Department of Justice is active in court right now to take away the entire Affordable Care Act, causing millions more people to lose their health insurance coverage during this pandemic. They propose cutting benefits to veterans, disabled people, poverty-stricken people, like in food stamps and so forth. What you do and do not do really matters. So you don't want to talk to Congress, but guess what? If you do call Congress and call your representative, you don't have to be as nervous as you think you do. You're not going to be talking to the congressperson. You're going to be talking to an intern who has a little checklist. Here's the issue. Are you pro or are you con? Tally, 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 hand the list to the congressman. So all you have to do is you don't have to give a speech or anything. You just have to make your voice heard. And what they really pay attention to is not form letters being forwarded or form emails, but when you personalize the content, you can add even just one sentence. I'm sending this because, or I want you to vote for or against this because. Something that's a personal letter, email, even tweet, or phone call has much, much more effect because they assume for everyone who actually stands up and takes that action, there are X number more people who believe the same thing. And they really only care about the people in their own districts. Susan Collins does not care what I think, but my local representative will. I put a whole bunch of stuff in the speech that are more details about that, but we're just going to skip over that now. But it does show you the preferred ways, which are the most effective. So if you want to go there, you can. Okay, the role of empathy in challenging racism. The president of the group for whom I made this speech is named Uma. She recently led a Zoom meditation with people. And she led it as, no matter who they were, as if they were the mother of George Floyd or the mother of some child who was murdered by the police. And she went through, for those of you who know what chakras are, she went through the whole system with the emotions that are attendant to that chakra system. It was very powerful. I'll also refer you to Jane Elliott, the third grade teacher who separated her students into blue eyes and brown eyes, and then did a little exercise in which it was the blue-eyed people getting discriminated against. And lo and behold, what an eye-opening lesson that was for everybody. She also took a map and asked the students, have you seen one like this? And every hand went up. And so then she pointed out how distorted it was. 2/3 of the way down, that whole thing is filled with North America and Europe, both of which are majority white countries, making South America and Africa look minuscule, completely distorting the way things are. Africa in that one seems half the size of Greenland. So there's some references in here for you to do that. So let's talk about whataboutism as I'm running out of time. When people say Black Lives Matter, and other people say all lives matter, Here's an example which I thought was very smart way to do it. If I tell you, save the rainforests, you don't say, save all forests. You know that all forests are valuable and that the rainforests are in much more danger than most of the rest of the forests. So if you're trying to explain that concept to somebody, that might be a good example to use. The role of education in fighting racism and even learning about it and becoming more educated. I leave a bunch of videos and films and books here. One of my most favorite in the whole wide world is Eyes on the Prize. It was an award-winning PBS series which documents the long history about race in America. And I'm scrolling down here. The African Americans is another one by Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who is, again, the guy whom you see on Ancestry now, if you're too young to know about some of these things. So I also included a reference to the Wall Street Journal to help with parents who want to figure out how to talk to their kids about this. And then I have a list of books. Not only is my time up, but apparently my voice is up. So if you want to reach me, email me at mypersuasivepresentations@gmail.com, or you can put comments wherever you're seeing this. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope it was helpful.